And so it's really important for us to get the picture of Daniel chapter 10, see the link between the end of chapter 10 and the first few verses in chapter 11. If you miss that and then try to just jump into chapter 11, it's going to be very hard. But I believe that, and as we've been doing it, if we study the book of Daniel in the same way with the book of Revelation, if we just study it the way God gave it, chapter by chapter by chapter by chapter, things kind of cinch and fit together. Have you noticed that so far?
Yes.
Yeah. So, we are we're starting to enter into territory that will challenge and exercise our mind. And so we want to pray and ask for God's blessing. Our Father in heaven, we want to thank you so much for the privilege that we have to consider your word this evening. Lord, we're going to begin this journey on this very last vision that you gave to the prophet Daniel. We ask for your help and guidance as we do so. So we ask for your presence to be here tonight. Grant us wisdom and understanding as we study this 10th chapter of the book of Daniel. And we thank you for all your promises and for all your blessings. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so let's divide up our reading. We have 21 verses to read tonight in chapter 10. And I would also like us to read the first 2 verses of chapter 11. Because chapter 11 is just a continuation of chapter 10, and I want you to see that. So we're going to be reading chapter 10 and then the first 2 verses of chapter 11. And as we do that, pay attention closely, and I think you will see, as soon as we do it that way, you'll see, okay, I think I get the gist of it, at least the introductory gist of it. So who would be willing to take verses 1 through 3? Okay, Judith has 1 through 3. And then Lawrence will let you have verses 4 through 10. And then who would be willing to take verses 11 through 21 through the end of the chapter? So that's going to be about 10 verses there. Who would like to take verses 11 through 21? Okay, Doug has 11 through 21. And then verses 1 and 2 of chapter 11. Did you raise your hand, Betty? Okay, Betty has then the first 2 verses of chapter 11. Okay, so we're in chapter 10, beginning with verse number 1.
In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar, and the thing was true. But the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing, and had understanding of the vision. In those days I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant bread, neither came flesh nor wine in my mouth. Neither did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled.
And in the 4 and 20th day of the first month, as I was nigh the side of the great river which is called Iddikel, then I lifted up mine eyes, and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men that were with me saw not the vision. But a great quaking fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. Therefore I was left alone and saw this great vision, and there remained no strength in me, for my comeliness was turned in me into corruption, and I retained no strength. Yet I heard the voice of his words, and when I heard the voice of his words, then was I in a deep sleep on my face, and my face toward the ground. And behold, his hand touched me, which set me upon my knees and upon the palms of my hands.
And he said unto me, Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright, for unto thee am I now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. Then he said unto me, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand, and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days. And when he had spoken such words unto me, I set my face toward the ground, and I became done. And behold, one like the similitude of the sons of men touched my lips. And then I opened my mouth and spake, and said unto him that stood before me, O my Lord, by the vision my sorrows are turned upon me, and I have retained no strength. For how can the servant of this my Lord talk with this my Lord? For as for me, straightway there remaineth no strength in me, neither is there breath left in me. Then there came again and touched me one like the appearance of a man, and he strengthened me, and said, O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be unto thee, be strong, yea, be strong. And when he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, and said, Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me. Then said he, Knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee? And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth. And there is none that holdeth with me in these days, but Michael your prince.
And in the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. Then the 4th will gain far more riches than all of them. And as soon as he becomes strong through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece.
Okay, so let's go ahead and pause there. That is Daniel chapter 10. And tonight we'll cover the main highlights of what's going on in the chapter, which I believe will set the historical setting for understanding what happens in Daniel 11. So did you notice kind of the transition there from chapter 10 over to chapter 11? Verse 21 of chapter 10 says, But I will show thee, this is one of the heavenly beings that has strengthened Daniel, but I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things but Michael your prince. Also, I in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now I will show thee the truth. So the conversation is continuing.
Yeah.
There's not a stoppage, so to speak, between Daniel chapter 10 and Daniel chapter 11. The conversation of this heavenly being speaking to Daniel after he had strengthened Daniel and informed him that he was battling it out behind the scenes, so to speak, with the prince of Persia, and we'll talk about that. As it transitions into chapter 11, then he says, it's like he's saying, and I'm just letting you know that I also was strengthening and working with Darius the Mede, who was before Cyrus. And then he goes on to say, now I'm going to show you the truth. And the truth of the matter we will begin to study tomorrow night as we head into the movements between the king of the north and the king of the south. So just pointing out, there's that transition there. And I find it very interesting. There are those, again, in the Christian world who believe that Daniel 10 does not go along with Daniel 11. And those who take that position, I don't take that position simply because I believe that we are to take the simple, obvious meaning of the text. And as you read through the chapter and head into chapter 11, it's very clear that this heavenly being is continuing the conversation. Therefore, we need to keep the chapters together. In fact, chapters 10, 11, and 12 are this one thing that is revealed to Daniel. So, let's discuss the main issues. Structure in verses 1 through 3, what did we find? Yeah, Daniel fasting. This description of Daniel's fast. In verses 4 through 10, we have the appearance of a certain man, and that certain man certainly had an effect on Daniel. In verses 11 through the end of the chapter, and the first couple of verses of chapter 11, we have this man's preliminary talk with Daniel. He's kind of setting the stage for the truths that he's going to share with Daniel that are going to be, in my opinion, quite amazing. Detailed information. So that's overall structure. Point 2, Daniel chapters 10 through 12 describe the final what? Yeah, the final repeat and enlarged segment of Daniel. And we pointed that out through our study over the past couple of weeks, haven't we? The first vision that was given was actually not given to Daniel, but given to who?
Nebuchadnezzar.
To King Nebuchadnezzar. That's in Daniel 2. And then, of course, then God gave Daniel the vision and the interpretation that he had given to King Nebuchadnezzar. And then the next vision is Daniel 7. What is Daniel 7? It's kind of a repeat and enlargement of Daniel 2. And then you have Daniel 8, the second vision of Daniel, the third vision in the book. And that's a repeat and enlarge of Daniel 7. And now, as we head into the last vision, Daniel's 10 through 12, that's a repeat. It's the last repeat and enlarge. And it's a repeat and enlarge of chapter 8, the previous vision. And we'll see that as we get into things tonight and tomorrow night. So, under point 2, Daniel's chapters 10 through 12 describe the final repeat and enlarged segment of Daniel. These prophecies point out the flow of... I started writing your answer.
Yeah. You left off the what?
Yeah. So, when I got the outline out this morning, I have these outlines printed out, and I was looking at it, I said, wow, I haven't filled this out. I need to fill it out. And I started filling in the blank on the first one to realize, wait a second, I got to make the copies of these first. So I almost filled out all the answers, and then it was like, So, yeah, these prophecies, that is the prophecies of Daniel, chapters 10 through 12, point out the flow of history through the end of the 2300 days or 2300 literal years and to the time when God redeems his people. That's what we're going to find out in the next few nights, is this chapter is giving detailed historical information during the 2300 years of the previous vision. And not only of the 2300, the history of those 2300 years, but the history of God's people to the very end of time. So I believe this chapter, this last vision, is especially for you and me. Point 3, Daniel 10 shows heaven's close connection with somebody. With who? Yeah, God's people on earth. Daniel 10, what we've read tonight, show heaven's close connection with God's people on earth. Just as God answered Daniel's fervent prayers to understand the prophecies concerning his people, so today heaven longs to answer the prayers of those who diligently seek God. So how is it that we see in chapter 10 heaven's close connection with the prophet and the people of God at that time? In what way do we see that?
Verse 11.
Okay, what does verse 11 say?
O Daniel, man greatly beloved.
Yeah. Yeah, Daniel's fasting and praying, and there's this picture that comes directly to him. Daniel, you are greatly beloved.
I think also too that we know that before, while he was still speaking, Gabriel was sent. So it wasn't like he had to wait, or I mean, he knew that it was urgent and he wanted to communicate.
The other part of that would be 12, where it says, your words were heard.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't that be kind of cool? You've taken some time, you decide, you know what? I feel like I need to draw closer to my Maker, my Redeemer, and I'm going to take this week and spend extra time in prayer. And maybe extra time with that, do a little bit of fasting. Did you know in the Bible, there's just many instances where they realized they needed to draw closer to God. They did that through fasting and prayer. Sometimes the fast was like what we might call a complete fast. Most of the time it wasn't a complete fast. In the book of Daniel, when Daniel fasted, he said, I ate no pleasant bread.
Yeah.
So what would that mean?
Good stuff.
Yeah, I stayed away from the apple pie this week.
Or the Danish.
or the what?
Danish.
Or the Danish, And so I believe that, we all believe in prayer here tonight. I believe it's not a bad idea to have some time also where we have some kind of a fast along with our prayer time. That fasting has a way of kind of cleaning the system out, so to speak, which clears the mind up, by the way. How many of you have ever taken a period of time and you did some kind of fast? So most of you here have.
It's interesting when you do it. It's interesting. I did a fast for our son, and God said, no, you're the one that needs help. Let me work on you first.
Okay.
I'll with your son later. And it was just so obvious to me.
That's when you found out in your special time with God. God was reminding you, you know what?
Yeah.
You have some things to do.
That's right, and it was this fast for our son, and I was really into it. It was just very interesting, and I appreciated that. It was very interesting.
Well, I think it's important when we fast not to go along with a grumpy face and to be just like it's normal.
Yeah, the purpose of fasting and prayer is to draw closer to God. We don't want to come to God in a grumpy way, although He can handle it. So I think what a wonderful picture in chapter 10 here, where Daniel is fasting and praying, and he's asking for the blessing of God. Let's move on. Point 4, historical setting. And this is very key to the understanding of this last vision. The historical setting of this what? Thing. Nowhere else in the book of Daniel does it say that which was revealed to Daniel is called a thing. But it's called a thing twice. Did you notice that? It says, a thing was revealed to me. And as, I read this for the first time when I was 10 years old, and I didn't understand any of it. I did like the fun stories in the book of Daniel. But, I didn't understand any of the prophecy stuff. I was a 10-year-old. And so I've been reading through this book in particular, for a long time. And I remember several years ago, probably more than several years ago, probably 15 years ago or so, it just hit me. Okay, this last thing is called a thing. And I just thought to myself, well, it's no wonder. Because you're reading all this information of these movements between the king of the north, king of the south, king of the north, king of the south, king of the north, king of the south. And so what are you going to call that? Well, as the translators translated it over into the English language, they just called it a thing. But then you find out that this thing actually is a vision. But we'll get into that. The historical setting of this thing that was revealed to Daniel is in what year of what king? The third year of Cyrus. He is king of Persia.
Now,
And-
that's something I can't understand. He's the king of Persia, verse 1. In verse 13, it says, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia. Now, that's not talking about Cyrus, is it?
In the context, it is talking about Cyrus, where this heavenly being is having to work pretty consistently with the king. But I think it's talking more than
Well, I think it's Lucifer's running
it's
Cyrus.
it's the one who is really behind the scenes. And if we remember that the main issue in the book of Daniel is the issue of worship, remember, God is calling for our allegiance and worship. And on the other side we have who? Satan, the devil, who is calling for our allegiance and worship. And so every good thing that happens in the book of Daniel, who's really behind the scenes working that? Yeah, God is and Christ is. And every bad thing that happens in the book of Daniel, we're not really talking about the little horn, which we have learned is Rome and its papal phase, papal Rome. We're not really talking about papal Rome. What are we talking about? It's Satan, the evil power behind that thing. And so, good question. I do believe that in the simple context of what we're reading, obviously, the prince of Persia at this time is who?
Cyrus.
That's King Cyrus. But there's more. It's not about Cyrus. Cyrus is going to do God's will, but obviously there were things taking place behind the scenes that Daniel saw, at least in this vision, that he wouldn't have seen without the vision. Does that make sense?
The other point would be, if we're talking about verse 13, there isn't going to be a literal prince of Persia that's going to withstand the angel.
Yeah. I mean, what human being is going to be able to do anything against a heavenly angel? They're on a different level than what we are. Yet, the heavenly agencies have been working on behalf of mankind all through the history of mankind. And these heavenly beings do not remove the freedom of choice of human beings on planet Earth. But they do work with them, urge them. Yeah.
But that's what I was gonna say, it seems like it's talking about the influence. They're influencing him to do God's will.
Yeah.
It isn't like they're actually in battle, but they're just, the Holy Spirit is influencing them
Yeah.
to do God's will.
Yeah, and we see that also in verse 1 of chapter 11,
Yeah.
where this heavenly being tells Daniel, also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And so as Darius the Mede was taking over, were there heavenly intelligences working behind the scenes to strengthen him and to encourage him along? Yeah. And you've got to know that also behind the scenes, the devil was there, trying to knock things off track. And did that happen? Or did the devil try to make that happen? Yeah, on the transition of the Babylonian kingdom to the Medo-Persian kingdom, that's Darius and Cyrus. Darius thought it was wise to set 3 presidents over the kingdom, 120 princes, and he made Daniel what?
The chief,
Chief.
And what did the devil immediately try to do?
kill him.
Get rid of him. Yeah. And here we read that the angel told Daniel in the 3rd year of Cyrus, so this is going to be about 6 years later, this heavenly being told Daniel, I'm working with Cyrus right now, the king of Persia, and I'm just letting you know before I give you more information, we've been working since the 1st year of Darius, when the transition of the world empires took place. Praise God, the heavenly intelligences and powers are working behind the scenes on behalf of God's people. Yeah, Betty.
I was just gonna say that it's a good reminder of what we're living with right now.
Yes, it is. As we take a look at some of the crazy things that are taking place in the world right now amongst the nations of the world, especially what we call the superpower nations of the world. Yeah, you got to believe that God and the heavenly angels are working behind the scenes. If the curtain of heaven could be opened, you know what we would see? I mean, we would see this stuff, wouldn't we? Yeah, we would see Christ and his angels working on behalf of humanity to save us. And we would see the devil and his imps of darkness working behind the scenes to get us off track.
It's only by God's mercy that we don't see that. We just go hide and hope. I mean, we would be we would not be able to cope with that if we could actually see that. The good, sure, but not the evil.
Yeah, we would certainly not want to see the full picture.
No.
Yeah. And so, what a wonderful picture here. We see the picture of the historical setting, this thing that is revealed. This is in the 3rd year of King Cyrus. You might find it interesting as you read Ezra, is the scribe of the king of Persia at this time. When you read through the book of Ezra, in Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, places these events in the 1st year of Cyrus. Does anybody know why there's this discrepancy? In Ezra chapter 1, it says these events start taking place in the 1st year of Cyrus. Here in Daniel chapter 10, it's seen taking place in the 3rd year of Cyrus. So,
More than one Cyrus?
no?
No. More than one.
Well, Darius took care of the kingdom for a while Cyrus was out
That's
conquering.
that's the thing. Darius is the uncle to Cyrus, at least the first Darius.
Yeah, there's more than one Darius.
And history tells us that Uncle Darius took in his nephew Cyrus, and it was a similar situation to like King Belshazzar and his father Nabonidus. King Belshazzar just wasn't automatically put in as the king without any training or support. History tells us that Cyrus was a co-regent for 3 years with his uncle. And on the 3rd year, that became officially his 1st year as the anointed king. And so Ezra, he puts together this material with the 1st year where Cyrus is the sole king. He has the full kingship. Daniel, he understands all the intricacies of the transition between the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire, and he gives us he makes it plain that we're in the 3rd year of Cyrus. Cyrus has been ruling already for 2 years before that, but it's in training with his uncle Darius. There are those who like to, in my opinion, like to start trouble and say, well, there's inconsistencies in the Bible, therefore the Bible's not true. And this is one of the things they point out. Well, in Ezra it says the first year, but in Daniel 10 it says the third year, therefore the Bible must not be true. And they don't do their historical study, which shows that there were co-regents ruling for the purpose of training the younger Cyrus. And that only makes sense, doesn't it? Let's go to the next thought there under point 4. In 536 BC, Cyrus began his independent reign over the Persian Empire, fulfilling the prophecies of what two prophets? Isaiah and Jeremiah. Very good. Fulfilling the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah, Cyrus ended the captivity of God's people. So he fulfilled the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah, ending the captivity of God's people. And this laid the groundwork for the fulfillment of what prophecy? Yeah, the 2300 days, more specifically, the 70-week prophecy. Yeah. This laid the groundwork for the fulfillment of the 70-week prophecy. Point 5, Daniel is seen mourning in prayer and fasting for 3 weeks. What was the purpose of his mourning? And to find that, let's consider the historical setting of verse 1. We're talking about the 3rd year of Cyrus. What's going on at that time? And would cause Daniel to fast and pray and to mourn during this time. And then at the end of verse 14, there's, I think, another point. So what would be the reasons for Daniel fasting and praying? And he's mourning. He's fasting and praying, and something is weighing very heavily upon his heart. Yeah.
Does he feel that it's time, through the prophecy of Jeremiah, it's time to go back?
Yes.
He's not thinking it's going to happen maybe, and he's got this 70 and that 70 in 7 weeks, and he's just like, what's going to happen here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about it. So the transition has happened. We're in the 3rd year of Cyrus now, and we're within just probably less than a year of the 70 weeks being fulfilled. You know that Daniel was praying. He believes in the prophetic ministry of Isaiah and Jeremiah. He knows that Ezra the scribe is kind of working with Cyrus, now. And Cyrus is listening to the truths of, can you imagine Cyrus asking Daniel? Cyrus is the young man, Daniel's the old man, and just a couple of years before that, they threw this old man in the lion's den, and the lions didn't hurt him. Do you think Cyrus asked this Daniel about that? And so Daniel is seeing, okay, the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah are wrapping up. And he knows that Cyrus is going to be a good young man. He also knows that God prophesied that Cyrus would be the one to release his people. And so he's praying. Do you suppose also he saw the attitude of his own people?
He's seeing all these things. But he also sees nothing's happening.
Yeah. And also, he knows it's about time to move, and there are things that are happening on both sides. That is, on the side of the kingship, where things seem to be kind of slow moving along, and he notices his own people are now seem to be very
Content.
Very content and comfortable in Babylon. Very Laodicea in Babylon. Huh?
Easy.
Yeah.
Do you think they ever reflected on the fact that they were told to build houses and build vineyards and whatnot?
What was that?
When they got into captivity, they were told to build houses, have gardens, have vineyards. Did they just accept that and forget the rest?
Yeah, they were told that because the prophets told them, this is going to be 70 years, we're going to be here a while. So the first generation, you guys are going to live and what? You're going to live and die here. So you better set things up to where you can take care of you and your family. But that was never for the purpose of saying, yeah, we've just got a new place to live from now on. You know?
But that was Israel's way.
And it seems to be the way of God's people all through history. Get comfortable where God has led us, get comfortable underneath the blessings of God, sometimes the chastenings of God. And we are content.
So what can we learn from all that?
Yeah, what can we learn?
Don't do it.
And don't do it. I think the main thing is Daniel, even though, I mean, he went in his late teens, now he's in his probably late 80s, and he's too old. We talked about this the other night. He's too old to make the trip back to Jerusalem. And yet he still believes in the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah. And if he was a young man again, guess what he'd be doing? He'd be rallying the people, at the right time. As soon as Cyrus says, go! If Daniel was a teenager, guess what he'd be doing? Yeah, he'd be rallying the people and meeting with the king or trying to get a request to meet the king and tell the king, hey, what do you want me to do? I'll help organize things. He believed in the prophets, and he therefore prospered. Huh?
Do you think that maybe one of the reasons he was mourning and stuff is because he knew that Cyrus, the prince of Persia, was contending with Lucifer or Satan, so he kind of knew how he was going, so that might have made him worry.
Yeah, there were probably all kinds of dynamics going on. Because we do know that when God's people did, Cyrus gave the permission, that laid the groundwork for the 70-week prophecy. And now Jerusalem was not rebuilt, overnight, but Cyrus' decision to grant freedom to God's people, say, now you can go back home again, that laid the groundwork, the foundation for all of this. But we know that even as that happened and God's people started traveling down, and when they got back, did the surrounding nations start giving Israel a hard time?
Sure.
Yeah, and Daniel was aware of all that. And so he's praying much for his people. At the end of verse 14, I think we get another hint there too. Look at verse 14 again, where the heavenly being says, now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy who? People in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days.
Yeah.
So what's the purpose of this information? To give Daniel understanding, not only in this context and setting of the third year of Cyrus the Persian, for God's people there, but also for God's people in the latter days. When this vision would be complete. And so that's weighing heavily upon it. I mean, think about it. He now has the information as to the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary, the 2,300 days. He has the starting point, the rebuilding, the commandment to rebuild and restore Jerusalem. He knew that that was not too far off in the future. But from that point unto the Messiah, the Prince, is going to be 483 long years. And that, if I was Daniel, that would probably overwhelm me. And then understand that then the cleansing of the sanctuary, this downtrodden of the sanctuary, is not going to be cleansed then for a total of 2,300 years down into time. And so he's not only praying and fasting for God's blessing and keeping for his people then, but also for God's people in the latter days.
And not be able to tell anybody about it. It was supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what the man Daniel was doing was fasting and praying. Asking, Lord, will you please help me to understand more? And so God gives him this last vision. So 2 points I have written down there under point number 5. The release of God's people from captivity. That's the local context in the 3rd year of Cyrus the Persian. And number 2, the destiny of God's people in the latter days. That is why Daniel is praying. Point 6. As Daniel was beside this river that's called the river Hiddekel, he saw a dazzling being clothed in linen. Who was this heavenly visitor?
Jesus.
See, that's the question. Well, and what was the description of this heavenly being? Notice verses 5 and 6. We're in Daniel 10, 5 and 6. Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body was like the beryl, his face as the appearance of what? Lightning. His eyes were like what? Lamps of fire. And his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass. And the voice of his word like the voice of a multitude. So he sees this man that is clothed in linen, and the glory that is the glory shining from this man is all this description. Now I believe there is a parallel passage in the book of Revelation on this. So let's hold our finger here in Daniel 10. Let's go over to the book of Revelation. So Revelation chapter 1, very last book of the Bible. Revelation chapter 1. And I'm going to start reading with verse number 10. Follow along with me. This is, of course, John speaking. He says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet saying, I am what? Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, what thou seest, write in the book, and send it to the 7 churches which are in Asia. And it has a list there of the 7 churches. Verse 12 says, And I turned to see the voice that spake with me, and being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. In the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto who? The Son of Man. Now, in the New Testament, when it mentions the Son of Man, who is it referring to?
Jesus.
Only one, that is Jesus. So, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hair were white like wool, as white as snow. His eyes were like what? Flame of fire. Have we seen that before? Yeah. His feet like unto fine brass. Have we seen that before? I lost my place here, so, verse 15. Yeah, his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And it goes on to describe him and points him out as the Son of Man, of course, which is Jesus Christ. These are the same characteristics that Daniel saw of the man that's clothed in linen, that's standing either upon the river Hiddekel or on the shore of Hiddekel. And so, who is the man that is clothed in linen? This dazzling being in Daniel chapter 10? Yeah, we believe that that is Jesus. And let's go to our next thought under point number 6 there.
Can I have one comment?
Oh, yes.
When I read this, my first thought was to go back to what the priests wore,
Yeah,
and they wore fine linen.
they wore fine linen. And who did the priests represent in the sanctuary service? They represented Christ and his priestly ministry. Yeah. They were dressed, the priests were dressed in fine linen from head to foot. And they had a golden sash on.
Can I ask, if this is telling us that this is Jesus, it does it say anything? Well, Gabriel's talking to him, but then Jesus is there also, right?
Yes. Jesus is there. He's the man that is clothed in linen.
Right.
And then there's another heavenly being that touches Daniel to strengthen him
That's Gabriel.
and then gives him information.
That's Gabriel.
And now in the text it doesn't say Gabriel, but we believe it is because he's giving more information from the previous vision. And the previous 2 visions, what heavenly angel communicated the information from God? It was Gabriel. And so, even though the text in chapter 10 and nowhere in chapter 11 does the name Gabriel appear, we believe that most it was Gabriel because God had chosen Gabriel in the previous chapters to give Daniel further information on these visions. Yeah, Doug.
Question about what's happening in verse 7. So it says here, Daniel alone saw the vision, and there were people with him that did not see the vision, but a great quaking fell upon them, and so they fled to hide themselves.
Yeah.
So from the glory of God, or what?
Well, I think we got a point here coming up on that, don't we?
Okay.
Kind of like with Saul and Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go. Well, let's finish the sentence underneath point 6 here. Christ was just as, this is kind of a point. Christ was just as active in the affairs of his people in Old Testament times as he was in John's day. Because we see the description of Jesus in Daniel and in Revelation, which tells us Christ is active on the throne and in dealing with mankind and planet Earth in Old Testament times and New Testament times. And as in days of old, Christ is still involved in the people's lives today. If Christ is alive and working on the behalf of mankind in Old Testament times, doing the same at the end of John's life when he's a prisoner on the island of Patmos, which is, the late 90s of the first century. If Christ is active in that time frame, which would represent over 700 years, do you think Christ is still alive and well and acting on behalf of God's people today? Absolutely. Yeah, praise God. So, Doug, let's go maybe to your point. Point number 7, during this experience by the river, as you read through this chapter, how many times did Daniel have to be touched? 3 times. So the question is this, why did Daniel have to be touched 3 times?
Well, he loses his strength.
Retaining no strength.
Yeah. When Jesus shows up, by the river Hiddekel. You know, Daniel's walking, Daniel and some of his buddies, they're walking, that's the way I word it, you know. They were probably good friends, you know, but obviously they were probably people that, you know, Daniel was held some position in the kingdom of Persia. So they may have been secretaries or something, maybe a couple of them were guards or something. But Jesus shows up on the river Hiddekel. Daniel has been fasting and praying for 3 weeks. The next day, he says, I need to take a walk out in nature. And how many of you like to do that? Along with your praying and special time? Take a nice walk out in a wheat field or down by the river or up in the mountains or whatever. I love doing that. So Daniel's walking by the river Hiddekel, and Jesus shows up in all his glory. And what does it do to Daniel?
He falls down. Dead, yeah.
He's down on the ground, his face is to the ground. The men that are with him, you get the picture, they hightail it back into the bushes. They're afraid, and they're, you know, I heard somebody say one time, well, if Daniel was able to run, he might have run. Well, Daniel would not. Daniel had already been all his life in communication to God. And he knew that this was, you know, this was a vision. This is a brighter being than the angels. And from a human standpoint, he can't stand. And so what
He
does
can't move either.
Yeah, he can't. He falls to the ground. Is he able to even breathe?
No.
The text says his breath leaves him. And yet he's alive. You know. But can he do anything? No. And so he has to be touched 3 times. And each time he's touched, he's given some strength. So this is the question that I have. What does this tell us about God? This setting of Daniel needing to be touched by a heavenly angel in the presence of God. What does this tell us about God?
He's compassionate.
Yeah, compassion.
Okay, he's compassionate.
Well, and he really cares. He wants Daniel to understand. He wants him to have strength to understand.
Yeah, he cares about Daniel. He wants Daniel to understand. But now it's not just the angel Gabriel showing up. It's the Son of God showing up in his glory. And does Jesus know? I mean, Jesus shows up. Does Jesus know that Daniel in his human flesh is not going to be able to handle that very well? Yeah, Jesus knows that. That tells me something about God. You know, God is so much higher than human beings. You know, sometimes we think we got it all together, you know. We think we're strong and we can do this, you know. You know, compared to heavenly realities. We need to keep things in perspective, don't we? Yeah.
The
Yeah.
scene reminds me of Moses. He said, show me your glory on the mountain.
Yeah.
Hides him in the cleft of the rock and walks away from it.
Yeah. Moses said to God, I'd like to see your face. And what did God say?
Yeah, he couldn't do it and survive.
Yeah, you can't do that and live. And Moses said, well, can you show me your glory? And God says, okay, I tell you what. I'm going to hide you in the cleft of the rock. I'm going to tuck you into the mountain. There's a little crevice here. I'm going to tuck you in there. And then I'm going to walk on by, and as I walk by, I'm not going to give you the frontal view. I'm going to turn my back. Just walk by, you know, like this. And then he proclaimed his name, which tells us that the glory of God really is who he is, who his character is. Yeah, then.
It seems to me that the men that fled are a precursor of what will happen in our last days.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesus is going to come again in all his glory,
They're gonna run
and God's people are going to be protected. those God's people who are alive. They're going to be caught up together with those that are resurrected. They're going to meet Jesus in the air. The wicked, what are they going to do? The book of Revelation says they're going to cry for the mountains and the rocks to fall upon them and to hide them from the face of the Lamb of God.
So this says that they didn't see the vision.
No, they didn't see the vision. Because as soon as Jesus showed up, Daniel goes boom on the ground. These men, they see this and they're frightened and they.
Just because something happened to Daniel? Do you think it's the power of his presence?
Well, it's definitely the power and the glory of the Son of God.
Yeah.
Yeah, humanity in our flesh. If Jesus were to show up in this room in all of his glory, he would show up because he would want to share something with us. But we would all need to be strengthened. Because as soon as he gets here, there's not one of us that can stand or sit.
I love 19.
We're on holy ground at that point, aren't we? Yeah.
I love 19 where it says, and he said, "O men greatly beloved, fear not, and peace be with you. Be strong." So he's saying to them, I want you to be at peace. I'm here. God loves you. Don't be afraid. Be at peace. I love that part. He's trying to comfort him.
Yeah. And so,
And when he spoke to me, I was strengthened.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he's strengthened a little bit each time. This is the last time he is strengthened. And now he's able to receive the truth.
Yeah.
Because this heavenly angel, we believe it's Gabriel, had touched him and strengthened him. And then there's a little bit of that conversation where Daniel says, I'm having a hard time even talking. And so he's strengthened again. And then words of encouragement come. You're greatly beloved. And what a wonderful God. During this experience by the river, Daniel's touched 3 times. Why? What does this tell us about God? It tells us a lot of things about God, doesn't it? I have written down here, one of the things is he's in the presence of the Son's glory.
Sinless.
And so he has to be touched by God's grace. He has to be touched by a heavenly angel. Because he's a human being, and that human being is in the glory, the direct presence of the glory of the Son of God. And so that tells us that God is, way up here, and mankind is what? Way down here. And secondly, Daniel's reminded that he's a human being. He's flesh. And when compared to the glory of God, there's no comparison. And that keeps Daniel humble in his place. And it should keep you and I humble and in our place as well. Point 8, who is this heavenly Michael? The angel Gabriel talks about how he has been working with the prince of Persia, the king of Persia. And he even mentions that even Michael has come to help do battle. And so who's Michael? Yeah, that's Jesus. The name Michael. Who can tell me what the name Michael means?
Who is like God?
Yeah, who is like God? Or who is as God? In the book of Jude calls Michael the archangel. Have you seen that phrase in the book of Jude?
Yeah.
Michael the archangel. And so some people believe that Michael is just a really strong angel. But if you study that word archangel, the word arch in the Greek language, guess what it means?
Leader of.
The what?
The leader of. Or
Yeah, the leader of or the ruler of. So Michael, the name means one who is as God, is the ruler of the angels. It doesn't mean that he's a strong angel. It means that he's the ruler of the angels. And if you're the ruler of the angels, you're not an angel. And so there's only one other level left above the angels of heaven. And that is the God, what we call the Godhead. You know, you have the Father, you have the Son, and you have the Holy Spirit. And so, Michael the Archangel is part of the process of working behind the scenes with Gabriel, probably other heavenly angels, as they are encouraging Cyrus and Darius to play their part in obedience to God's word. And the devil is also behind the scenes trying to get this thing right, because the reality is the devil doesn't want God's people to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild. But why would the devil not want God's people to do that?
Messiah.
Yeah. Because God's people in Jerusalem have that piece of geography that was very important. It was the apex of society there, where traveling from north to south, or south to north, or east to west, people had to go through that piece of geography. And God placed his people there for a purpose. And what was the purpose?
Be a witness.
To be a witness to all the nations of the earth for the promised Messiah, the promised seed who was to come. And they didn't obey God, so they got taken into Babylonian captivity for 70 years. Well, the 70 years are up. It's time to go home. And the devil did all he could to make sure that this city was not going to be rebuilt, that the temple of God was not going to be rebuilt. And so Gabriel's working behind the scenes. Jesus, Michael, the archangel's working behind the scenes. And, of course, the city is rebuilt, and the temple.
So the devil was working with those, all the people who were opposing them. And the, shall we call them traitors within the ranks there that were informing the opponents?
The devil has his friends working against God's will in all different kinds of circles, including the church, including God's people. When Cyrus gave the command, most of the people stayed in the land of slavery. That means they lost the vision of the purpose of who they were.
What their purpose was.
Yeah. The ones who went back knew that they were going to a place that was not as nice as what they were leaving. But the reason why they went back is because they believed God's word. They knew that there was a reason for the 70 years of chastisement. And now they had the privilege to go back home and rebuild the city and the temple. They got to go back to the place that God had promised them and given them for the purpose of sharing about the Messiah to all nations. And that next generation, there were those that stood up. Most of them were young men and young women who said, "We're going home. We're part of God's message at this time. We're going to do it with the help of God." Yeah. So, where are we at here? Point 9, these heavenly beings fight against the prince of Persia. There was a little prince at this time, that was Cyrus. But it's really not about Cyrus. Behind the scenes, they're making sure they're holding back the devil in all of his work.
So the Prince of Persia then refers to the devil?
I believe it refers to the devil. In the context of the story, you can't remove Cyrus from the picture because he is the king of Persia, literally. But this whole picture is the whole book of Daniel is more than about Nebuchadnezzar and Darius and Cyrus. These men were great kings that ended up doing God's bidding. And I believe they'll be in heaven. But it really wasn't about them, was it? Yeah. In chapter 11, verse 1, they also worked with, that is, these heavenly beings that are fighting against the prince of Persia. In verse 1 of the next chapter, they also worked with who?
Darius.
Yeah, Darius the Mede. And what does this suggest? These heavenly intelligences working behind the scenes with these kings, what does it suggest?
That the kings need help.
The kings need help. I didn't think of that one, but that's a good point. These guys need help. You know, that's probably one of the reasons why Daniel's been fasting and praying for 3 weeks. He said, "Lord, be sure they get it." You know.
God sets up kings.
Yeah,
Takes them down.
God sets up kings. That's what he told Daniel in the vision in chapter 7. And he takes them down. This is very clear that God is the one that's in control. God is leading the way for his people. And so his people do not need to be discouraged. Do you suppose it gave courage to Daniel when he understood? He's been praying for 3 weeks. And so Gabriel said, Daniel, while you've been praying, I'm just letting you know, I'm Gabriel. And I've been working behind the scenes the whole time that you've been praying and fasting. I'm working with your friend Cyrus. I'm also working against the influences of the devil. And I can imagine Daniel saying, praise God. Praise God.
So he broke his fast then. He had good.
You have no need to fast now when you've seen Jesus. Yeah. There's a time to fast and pray, but man, when you are connected to God, it's time to, start eating the apple pie there, you can eat some of this stuff and go with courage and strength in the name of God.
This tells us that while we are praying for our problems or our new things that, whatever, that God is already working, even though we're not getting the answer at this time. He's working on it. Even while we're praying, we expect an answer right away, but it might be weeks down the road or years.
He's working on the problem, he's working on us.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
before we call,
He'll answer.
God answers. Praise God. Last point here, chapter 11, verse 2. The angel says, and now I will show you the truth. So what's the truth? This is kind of be the bridge to our study for tomorrow night. Notice what the truth is of these matters. Chapter 11. Well, I'm going to start with 21 of chapter 10. But I will show, this is the angel, we believe Gabriel speaking to Daniel. But I will show you that which is noted in the scripture of truth. And there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael your prince. Also, I in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in where? Persia. And the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength and through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And so, question. So, the angel Gabriel says, now I'm going to show you the truth. He said, so Cyrus, the king of Persia, is here, and Gabriel's been working with Cyrus. And he's telling Daniel now, there's yet going to be 3 kings after him. And then the 4th king is going to be richer and greater than these first Persian kings. And the 4th one's going to do something. What is the 4th one going to do?
Attack Greece.
He's going to start stirring it up with Greece. By the way, we've already studied, the previous chapters in Daniel. How well did it work for the Persian Empire to start mixing it up with Greece?
Not well.
Not well. And so, if you and I want to have an understanding of the movements of the king of the north and the king of the south, it is in the context of the Persian rule to where it begins to stir things up with Greece. That's the setting and the context of the movements of the king of the north and the king of the south. And if we don't understand that, if we were to just jump into reading about the movements of the king of the north and king of the south without the background of chapter 10 and the historical setting, we would, in my mind, I would be like, you would not know where to place any of it. You wouldn't even know where to begin. But do we know where to begin? Yeah. The angel Gabriel tells Daniel, yeah, your friend Cyrus is ruling right now. Well, 3 more guys are gonna come along, and then there's a 4th guy. This 4th guy is gonna start stirring it up with Greece. And then we go from there. That's the setting, that's the backdrop, Yeah, Maggie.
Where does Artaxerxes come in this? Where was he with these 3 kings? Was he wasn't the one who was stirring it up, was he?
Xerxes, we're gonna, in our study tomorrow night, we're gonna find out who these 3 kings are, who the 4th one is. I believe the 4th one was the first Xerxes, which is Ahasuerus
Okay.
in the days of Queen Esther.
Esther, okay.
And he begins messing with Greece. Now, he doesn't wrap it up. There are other Xerxes that are going to come after him. But what Gabriel is showing Daniel here is kind of the backdrop and the setting for further information. Remember, the last vision is just the last segment, the last repeat and enlarge of the previous vision. What was the previous vision? Daniel chapter 8. With the ram and the he-goat. Who did the ram represent? Medo-Persia.
Persia.
Who did Greece? Oh.
Greece is the he-goat.
The he-goat represented Greece.
And Alexander.
And you have the 4 horns. You have the little horn. And so this is just the repeat and enlarge from that. You have still Persia. You have the mention of Greece. But now God is going to give more fine-tuned details of how the last movements of God from the days of Persia and Greece through Rome to the very end time. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, Doug.
So the truth was actually the opportunity to see God's working in through history.
Yeah, he's setting the stage for being able to understand fine details that are going to be presented. And all these fine details are truth. Because Daniel, remember, he's in his setting, and he knows that God's people are going back to rebuild, and yet he also knows now that it's going to be 2,300 long years more in the process of Messiah coming the first time, and then coming a second time. And that was overwhelming to him. So God in his kindness goes back down and tells Daniel, we're going to give you some more detailed information of how God is going to take care of his people. Yeah, David.
Takes you to the text in the New Testament where it talks about what is truth, and it is that God will set us free. And that was the truth of them, God will set us free.
Yeah, God is going to set his people free. God is going to take care of his people. Even though, as you read the movements between the king in the north and the king in the south, there are challenges that God's people go through. It's very clear as you read the text. But God's the one who is sending the angel Gabriel. Gabriel's the one that's touching Daniel and strengthening him and letting him know God's going to take care of it all. And he's still calling for God's people to worship him and him alone.
And in God's timing.
All right. 8:20, we've gone a little over again. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and stand and let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful